away from me!
Would you rather I leave you behind to die, Harry?
Do it! Put me down!
Maybe I should have left him alone. The PSP was an amazing piece of tech back in the day. I myself own the Star Wars version, although I no longer have it around since it's long been broken. Truly, I miss this handheld console. Not that I'm not totally recording from a PSP at the moment. Do not look at the computer behind the curtain, please. I knew the PSP had a few Spider-Man titles, but I had no idea this handheld had Spider-Man 2 and 3 on it. Spider-Man 2 in particular is a bit of a strange case. It was released in 2005, a year after the counterpart of the same name was released on the PS2 and basically every other console in existence at the time. Viscarious Visions were the game developers. They made the amazing Barbie Magic Genie Adventure for Game Boy Color. Oh, they also threw together that Diablo 2 remaster in case anyone cares. I believe Spider-Man 2 on the PSP uses the same engine as the Spider-Man 1 game for PS2 since it plays nearly identical, although with a bunch of changes to the system that, for me, made the PSP title much more fun. You know, I was pretty harsh on the PS2 Spider-Man 1 game for not living up to my bad memory, and playing the PSP game that's very similar has given me a new perspective on it. Spider-Man 2 for PSP was a welcome surprise I enjoyed all the way through, except maybe for the air combat that was complete garbage. But combat on the ground I felt was majorly improved, mostly because skills were given out as upgrades for points earned during a level, while also teaching you all the combos the game had to offer. Aside from 2 combos you need to purchase which increase your combat and punch combos to 4 hits instead of 3 in their base form. The combos you learn during the tutorial allow you to stun enemies or kick enemies up into the air by using Rock Lee's primary Lotus and opening the first gate of opening. And maybe Spider-Man 1 on PS2 had these, but having a tutorial focus on only these few unique moves really helped cement them in my mind. This is more of a preference on my end, so whatever. The tutorial was really helpful, and I enjoy the RPG-styled upgrade systems more than the collectathons. The RPG systems give me a nice dopamine rush. But honestly, you don't need to make extensive use of these abilities to beat the game, at least on the normal setting. Spidey feels like he's actually powerful since he kills, knocks out thugs with ease. Web abilities were simplified as well, and the tutorial showed you how to use them all. You can disarm enemy guns, swing them above your head, and tie them up. Again, you can make it through the game without any of these, but you're kinda shooting the fun in the foot if you decide to do that. I did make a big deal about the movement in the PS2 Spider-Man 1 game as it felt sluggish, but here it feels smoother, or maybe it's just because the game is way easier. I'm thinking it's because of the game's ease since the game lacked camera controls. Kind of. See, you could use the PSP's D-pad while not moving to rotate your view, but it's ridiculously stiff and doesn't work while you're moving. Swinging was not great, but the game being so short made it much less of a problem, I think, and I believe most of the levels were indoors. Chase sequences were kinda slow and boring, which I'm not sure what's worse, hard and boring or slow and boring. One at least gives me a challenge, but the other feels less frustrating. What do you guys think? The bomb disarming was much more enjoyable. It was simpler to get to each bomb, while the Simon Says minigame was a fun little addition to add some difficulty to it, and the mechanic only came up this one time, so it didn't get old. You know, this game allowed me to create a lot of funny moments, or at least in concept. Here, Aunt May gets locked in a giant bank vault and you are given a small amount of time to free her and the others before they suffocate. Which is a bit dumb, but waiting out the timer will just kill everyone in the bank vault and you gotta start over. But I remember I couldn't stop laughing at the fact I just let Spidey's aunt slowly suffocate to death. Or these cops at the beginning of the game. I waited till just before the cop car fell and quickly ran Spidey up to the car so it looks like he caused the dirty pig's deaths. Boss fights are just meh, just like the other two Spidey games I've reviewed. At least it was attempted to make a few of the boss fights feel a bit smart instead of just being death matches. While fighting Shocker and Rhino, you first lead Rhino into Shocker's blast to stun him and later use Rhino to break down the pillars Shocker is standing on. Shocker was not an enjoyable boss fight and I'd like to forget it happened. Vulture's second half had an interesting concept. He started throwing a crane hook at you, and you needed to hide behind a building or pillar, then go into homing kick mode until he's defeated. The last boss, Doc Ock, felt like it was quickly put together for a release date. You break a few machines in the first half as Otto chases you down, then you use Spider-Man's spiderwebs to blind him and cripple his electronic limbs until he decides it's time for him to sacrifice himself to save New York from a problem he caused. Graphics are a bit hard to comment on, partially due to the computer behind the curtain, which doesn't give me the game's original graphics that were much more jagged and pixelated, shown here in a few screenshots of it back in its heyday. Playing it today on modern systems gives a few changes that make it, at least to me, a good-looking game. You have almost this watercolor blend of the textures with the 3D models smoothed out with a much larger resolution. Even the boring cityscapes feel bright and nice to look at. The 3D models are a hit and miss. At times they look great or at the very least passable, but Vulture's model in-game is absolutely disgusting.
You're not a child of God. Garbage!
Spider-Man's torso is basically a Dorito. The man is absolutely stacked from the spider juice. So, I guess I've got to talk about the cutscenes. They are pretty damn ugly, and the developer presumably didn't have a whole lot of time to work on them, but I can't just overlook these. Peter looks like his model changed at the end at some point because look at these two faces. They look nothing alike to me. Hell, Peter never looks like Toby for a single moment. None of the CGI characters do. I'm wondering if there's like some confusing licensing around using an actor's likeness, so they made them just barely recognizable to the actors, or they didn't have much time. Cutscenes, not good. Next! Level design is all around simple and pretty straightforward, but levels are pretty full of random objects to toss or break. Again, it probably helps I'm playing in a 2K resolution and with this watercolor pixel style, but the levels look pretty damn good to me. Sound has its highs and lows. It has pretty bad voice acting, even worse than the other installments of the Sam Raimi Spider-Man games of the era, but I still find them quaint. Tobey Maguire does his absolute best to do the worst voice acting of his career so far, and that's a pretty big hurdle to jump.
Oh no, the play. I missed it.
Sorry, Toby, but you failed royally.
I missed the part where that's my problem.
Also, there's this out-of-place scream after Spidey stops the train, and I really don't think Toby made that scream. Here, take a listen. What the fuck was that scream, guys? J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson and Alfred Molina as Doc Ock do an excellent job. Although Alfred Molina can sound a bit silly at times, near the end it sounds like he's having the best orgasm of his life with this scream. Sadly, Bruce Campbell was not brought on to do the tutorial guy voice, and the game loses the Campbell charm. Nothing against you, tutorial guy.
Before we get started, you'll need to know how to get a hold of me.
There were 2 times within the game I heard a Wilhelm scream, which is just, oh so good. Otherwise, the SFX are nothing new for the Spidey games, since a lot of them were reused either from the Spider-Man 1 PS2 game or the Spider-Man 2 PS2 game, but I'll talk about that in the next section. I record without music so I can show the sound effects easily while playing, and to not interrupt my own music in the videos as much. So I listened to the game's soundtrack afterwards, and honestly, this game's soundtrack kinda slaps. Reactor Playing here is such an intense track, I can't see it being used for any of these tiny levels with its kind of slow gameplay. Doc Ock's Rampage has this cool rock song that goes way harder than what you'd actually do in the final level, which is break a few machines and web an old man in the face with radioactive spider seed. Even his train theme is super over the top for a calm train level. So if there's anything to take away from this video, it's go listen to the game's soundtrack, my fungoids. It deserves your respect. Thanks Lolita and Michael for these gnarly tracks. So I had to make this its own section because most of my review at first was directly comparing it to the Spider-Man 1 game for the PS2 released in 2002 because it reuses so many assets as well as potentially using the same game engine like I mentioned earlier. I cannot confirm they did use the same engine, mind you. There's no wiki page or interviews that I could find talking about this particular PSP game, and I'm bad at research. But the PSP's Spider-Man 2's similarities to the PS2's Spider-Man 1 game are so close, I do feel confident in saying for the video that they share the same engine. The swing style and animation are the same. Webs attach themselves to air molecules above Spidey. Web ziplining uses the same animation either on a wall or standing still. Spidey's crawl on the ceiling and walls are identical across these games. Bad guys have the same fight animations, and I think they share a bunch of the same textures and sound effects. The game is separated into levels you select instead of being open world. You gather points for doing well during a level. Outdoor levels look very similar. It reuses the central station and bridge levels, if not other levels entirely that I'm unaware of. The tutorial levels also take heavy inspiration from the PS2 Spidey game's tutorial. Swinging out of bounds will fling Spidey back into the game zone. It's a lot of stuff these games share, and it's pretty fresh in my mind since I've reviewed the Spider-Man 1 game for PS2 recently. But it also has a bit of influence from the famous Spider-Man 2 game for the PS2 and other consoles. The story is a bunch of spiders in a trench coat to look like Spider-Man 2. A lot of the cutscenes match parts of the movie, but most of the time these parts have nothing to do with what's happening in the game, if that makes sense. Like, the best example is the scene where Mary Jane and Peter Parker meet at the cafe. In the movie, it may be the most important scene of all. Spider-Man 2 is a film of duality. Peter in the first Spider-Man film is coming into his understanding of what it means not only to be Peter, but what it means to be Spider-Man. In Spider-Man 2, Peter is wrestling with being these two people. Is it possible for Spider-Man and Peter to coexist? Can Peter make his classes and live a fulfilling life with a circle of friends while also shouldering the burden of responsibility over his uncle's death? At first, the answer is no, they cannot coexist, and after tossing the Spidey suit to the streets, Spider-Man is no more. Everything's all fine and dandy until Peter sees a mugging he can't stop, and a talk with his aunt about heroes and responsibility and all that lovely stuff. So in this moment in the cafe, Peter is given a choice over the girl of his dreams or over the person he needs to be, and rejects MJ for a second time, regaining his powers by the end of this whole sequence. This is the same scene in the game, but without the context from the actual movie. See, as far as I remember, there's never a point you're losing your powers. I mean, it wouldn't be a fun Spidey game to suddenly be stuck as Peter Parker or some other random pedestrian. That means when this scene pops up, Peter is just having a coffee with his friend and just kinda reiterates the end of Spider-Man 1. The ending, where Otto sacrifices himself, is basically a monologue of his character arc just before he dies because they forgot to pepper those moments throughout the game and instead spent time on Ugly Vulture's face. And then the game ends the same way as the movie does. Mary Jane finds Peter as Spidey because he took his mask off. Again, I have to mention the film, but in the movie, this was to help signify the synthesis of Spider-Man and Peter as one being who ends up with the girl. The game didn't play into any of these elements, so it's just a cheap imitation of the source material. MJ leaves her astronaut boyfriend to come be with good old Pete in the end. There was a hilarious moment when Doc Ock is first creating the fusion reactor. Some guy gets absolutely demolished by a falling light. And Otto says it's only a minor hiccup.
A minor hiccup!
Like, come on guy, someone is at a minimum a paraplegic now. This is more than a minor setback. It's a surprisingly fun game for a random PSP game nearly no one speaks about. It has a few minor dents in its metal coat, but for me, it holds up. It's helped me appreciate the PS2 Spider-Man 1 game a lot more, with its elements shifted around and tweaked to make it far more enjoyable. In my opinion, of course. Well, that's it for the video. Please consider subscribing and taking a look at my other content. Otherwise, have a good day, my fungoids.